Hello, everyone. I'm your host for today's Swine podcast. I'm Laura Greiner, and with me today I have Dr. Gustavo Machado, who is a veterinarian at the North Carolina State University, and he's currently an assistant professor there. Gustavo, how are you today?
Hey, pretty good, Laura. How are you doing? Thanks
Good.
for inviting, and I appreciate the time. I'd like to discuss some topics with you today. So thank you.
Yes. Well, we're excited to have you on today. Gustavo, before we get started, if you wouldn't mind giving our audience just a little bit more of a background about who you are and some of your experiences, I think that would be really helpful for them.
Yeah, sounds good. So as I said, I'm a vet by training. I did get involved with research since my DVM, since my first year. So that led me to research, and I was always interested in more numbers than actually clinical things. So that led me to pursue my master's and my PhD in epidemiology, more specifically working on disease transmission. And I'm originally from Brazil, so my master's and PhD were done all down in the south. And then once I finished, I started as a position assistant professor down there in the same university, but then some positions came up at the WHO. So I actually worked for WHO during Zika outbreaks when they just started in Brazil, 2016. Then after some time there, a position came up in the University of Minnesota, so I decided to join University of Minnesota as a postdoc. And right after that, in 2018, I started my tenure here in North Carolina. So since that time, I'm just setting up my lab down here and getting busy with some topics.
I didn't realize that you had spent some time working around the Zika virus. So that's actually really intriguing, just being able to watch a relatively emergent disease and how you manage it. And so I think that really talks nicely into what we were going to talk about today. And the work that you're doing is about disease and disease modeling and how do we manage disease. So, I mean, can you maybe start with a little bit on just that thought process of disease and disease introduction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and right in 2016, when first case of Zika appeared, reports, very clinical things like on the crisis of that, it was interesting to see that the information coming out from human health were not as good as what we are normally seeing in animal health. So it really helped me to understand that I should just go back, I think, to animal health, where we have better data and more control over the populations, than to human health, where we don't have too much control. We don't, yes, as for pigs, we tell them where to go and what to do, but for humans, it's a bit more challenge. So that really helped me defining where I want to go, and started to work more in mathematical models of disease spread in swine. And what really attracts, like my line of research was how much data and how good the data is collected from the industry, and the possibilities that allow me to answer some questions that are, I don't know when I'm going to be able to answer all those questions, but it allows me to at least, be very happy with what we can do as far as understanding how a farm becomes infected and which is dominant route of transmission. If it's pigs coming into the site, this is the location where that farm is located, or other things that we still don't know. So that really helped me making this decision. And I did some work as well with cattle in the past, but really the complexity of the data and how the data is collected from swine is really attractive.
When you think about modeling and some of the challenges that we see, but then also how modeling has changed over time, can you maybe talk about some of the key things that have happened in the last 20 to 30 years that have allowed us to maybe do a better job of modeling disease transmission and movement?
Yeah. And this, if you look in history of disease models, like you go back to 1960s, when the first very basic model of understanding of that people were susceptible, then becoming infected, and then recovering or dying, that was very important findings that led to basically three revolutions on this field. One was how we can actually develop a dynamic system where we know who is contacted who and the time between exposure, infection, transmission. So that took a couple of years to figure out, but that was solved. And then after that, the data became more available, and then it became more expensive in order the time to run these models, and computers in the past were a bit clunky. Yeah, right now we are really advanced on that. So that was also solved with technology, and we just continue to excel on that. That was then solved, more in the 80s and 90s, and after that then becomes, okay, how do we use then the understanding of the modeling and now the computation that we have to inform policymakers and stakeholders to then make informative decisions with then the understanding of how things are spreading and what are the impact of the control interventions that we have on hand. And so that's where we at this point in time. As COVID showed us that we did not know that locking people down will work. And now certainly we have much more of a conclusion that maybe in some places, but not always. So that's very clear correlation between that and pigs doing herd closure, for how long, when, and how that should be done in order to reduce then our spread downstream. So, and so far, the industry has been doing a lot and testing a lot of things, but we are getting to the position now that you can actually test that entire intervention in entire company and see how that actually would reduce transmission and improve production, for example. So we are right at that position. So that's why I'm very excited that, with the amount of data and the quality of the data industry is collecting, a lot of things gonna be answered, moving forward. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I can always remember whether it was a PRRS break or a PED break or whatever happened on the farm, the first question from the vet team was, well, how did it get there? And in creating a model, in my mind, it's nice, but we have to have the background information to feed the model, right? And so how do we start to gather that information or sort that information out when we may not always know, that A plus B led to C?
Mm-hmm. And that's you get into complex systems, which is basically understanding how, what are the weak points and what is the minimum data that's needed to try to approximate how things are spreading. So there is some work already done. We did some, then other groups working on this topic in Europe as well. And it is possible to rank the routes that were more likely to actually infect that specific location. So for example, you might have your breeding sites in a quite dense area, and perhaps maybe you cannot trace by just looking at the data how that cell became infected, but reconstructing the whole transmission chain back in time and continue to reevaluate, you can actually figure out on proportion-wise, let's say 90% of the breaks can only be explained because of the location. So that leads to some decisions that could be made as far as moving that herd then out of that region. It's very expensive intervention. However, if we have those models that run, often and for some time, let's say for a year, is very you can conclude that that's the case. You can never exactly explain all the things just because we are in a complex world. We don't have all the data that we need, but with the data that we have, we can approximate how that farm became affected. So, and do that in almost real time. The data that the industry collects is daily, right? It's companies that have their situation disease-wise updated every day, every afternoon. They know what happened throughout the whole system. That's really pivotal information. That plus population data plus the movement of pigs and people is plenty to already start understanding how things are spreading.
So that works really well when you have a disease like PRRS or PED, where we have experience within the United States, where we can look at that and start to understand our own system and models. But what about something like ASF? So obviously there's data in other countries, but not all production systems work the same way as they do in the United States. So how do you start to create a model from a disease that we know something about, but maybe not all of the pieces?
Mm-hmm. So that's another very good thing for the industry in this country, is that the data that's needed is there, which is the dynamic of the population, the mortality, the movement. So with that on hand, it's possible to actually create a simulator, like imagine a video game, where you can actually simulate the introduction, and you can actually, with the computation that we have on hand these days, you can infect every single farm synthetically and throughout a year, 2 years, every day, and see what's expected to come out from that farm. How many other farms that farm is likely to be infected, how long will be the epidemic, and then the most, I think, important thing to mention is we can implement the intervention then before doing it. So with that, we can really work out what's likely to work better if we do have that. And knowing which farms are more likely to actually spread the disease when it comes into the domestic situation is very important. And how we feed that information back to the companies and to the producers, so they know that their farm is a very important link on the transmission of a possible ASF outbreak. So it is totally possible. We have done some work on that already, and is the idea is, if there is real information, real data, production-wise, more actually location, population, and the movements, it is possible to have a national model that could be activated at any time that we might have an infection detected, and then work from there. So other countries have done this already. And little by little, the industry, I think, is understanding that sharing that information in a protect way, confidential and so on, they benefit at the end, because then we are better prepared to respond. We're not going to have time to collect that enormous amount of data and produce a reliable scenario when we already have a emergency. So I'm really glad the industry is open to that. I saw a lot with Bob Morrison when I was in Minnesota. He was the first one to start the whole, the industry saw the value, and when 𝘕𝘗 continued to excel, it is important to to continue to have that, so we can actually have a chance when we have an emergency. So
you mentioned that you've been working on some of these models, and you also mentioned something about putting in an intervention or setting up a scenario. So have you done much of that? And if so, what have you learned from these practices, if you will?
Mm-hmm. So we do have a publication coming up, and we already developed an ASF model, and we are interested on answering a few questions. So first of all, what between all the transmission routes that the data is available, such as trucks moving between farms, loading crews moving between farms, pigs moving between farms location, and also feed being delivered to those sites. So looking at all those possibilities with real data, we're able to estimate per farm type, because biosecurity wise, not to go into that yet, but biosecurity wise, if we understand how good biosecurity is of a breeding site, that should reduce the likelihood that farm to become infected. Yeah. So we also include that in the model and other things. Not get in detail, but we can already see just with the model for these calls that the contribution of pigs moving between farms and the distance between the farms seems to be the more relevant routes of transmission. Of course, we are missing a few things like rendering and other routes. We are missing that part, but we can already highlight that the routes that seems to be more important for sows are different from the ones for the downstream farms, which are different from the nurseries. So trying to just do the same thing for any farm type seems to be that maybe not the best idea. So you might need to think a bit more, how hard you want to go into, depopping or stopping movements from cells from downstream farm. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, of course, how long the epidemic is expected to continue, with no intervention and with the interventions that have been described by the Red Book. So we are working on that part now. So hopefully soon we can also see how feasible those interventions are and then shed some light. And we are working with folks at the government level to maybe some things maybe could be changed a bit in order to allow for the business to survive, which makes sense according to the model. So that's what we learned so far. Many things that still need to be done, and we're looking forward to expanding to other states because as we know, companies operate differently across the country, and some flows are quite mixed up compared to others. So that all plays a big role. The dynamic of things moving between farms would play a role. We cannot assume that they're all the same, and we cannot simulate that information. So, with participation of the companies, I think we're gonna get better prepared to respond to those questions and help on updating some documentations about the response. So, yeah, we are very excited about that, but I still wait a little bit until things come out. But it's interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned just a little bit there about some things that you still feel, would be more valuable or bring more value to your model. So what do you feel like still missing that our producers or veterinarians can contribute to help you out?
Mm-hmm. So there is some sensitive things that we understand that rendering, for example, is something that there is contracts that attend different companies. So there is some concerns about that information. We understand. So the rendering route still, the mortality piece is very important for early detection. And that's also something that I think is improving. I know there is a big project going on mortality and survivability, led by Iowa State, that I think gonna help also understand, what's the baseline of the mortalities. So that data is also very important. We're still a bit missing on that part. And one thing that we are very passionate about, that we're working with the biosecurity part of things, we have the 𝘪𝘮𝘱, which is standardizing the SPS plan, so collecting biosecurity information for every single farm. We have about 10,000 farms now. We have 14 states and 26 companies there. Once we have that information, then we can work out how good those plans are as far as what's in those plans as far as cleaning stations and other things, and perhaps estimate how a cleaning station is important or not. So if we do have that information and we know how to include that in the model, we can then say, well, maybe you don't need to have a cleaning station this far, or maybe every farm needs to have these 3 things. And having those 3 things, then we are good. And trying to not overwhelm, it is overwhelming to implement a biosecurity plan. Everybody, I think, agrees with that, and the compliance and all that. So if we could, really see what's really important, I think that'll be valuable as well. So we are working on that. And I think other things that will become very important is the movement of people. That I also know that there is some other projects going out there that are looking at like building digital fences, like for other contexts, like mailing or other service folks coming on site that they might not even know that the disease is actually spreading. They might be the ones that are. So I think those are the missing pieces that I think with time we'll be able to include them as well. So
yeah, I think those are great things to think about for sure. So as you look forward in your vision for the model, what do you see for the future?
Well, I think the future is already here, right? We're already in 2022, and what we are trying to do is to actually have, especially for person PD and ASF, a model that can run national level and can run like quickly in 1 day or 2 days. These models are very expensive as computation wise. So we are investing on bringing people from physics and other disciplines to work together in order to optimize that. So I think the one of the limitations that we have for the future is how we work together, not only with the industry, but also with other disciplines in closing gaps that we cannot do on our own. And, we can be good in one topic, but we are missing other pieces. So having, opportunity to train more students and train more researchers from different fields and bring into our problems here in disease transmission, especially in swine. I think if we can do that efficiently, then I think we're gonna excel on a new boundary here, and we're gonna be able to really get close to understand how things spread. And the other thing that I see as the future is when we do have that enough information at the barn level, like where pigs are within the pens and what's the dynamic inside the barn. Like I can highlight examples of flu work that has been done by Monse, for example, in Minnesota, that she's looking at how the transmission occur within the facility. We really don't understand well that part yet. So having the ability to include that level, and then the farm level, and then between farm level, then I think then we can retard when we get to that point, I think. So but that's what I see, moving forward. And another thing that not too much for ASF, but more for PD, flu, and so on, is including genomics and including the mutation of virus within our understanding of what's going on. I think it's going to become very cheap moving forward, that the industry is going to realize that it's maybe not too expensive to include a whole genome in the surveillance that they are already doing. So I think it's going to become cheap enough to have that information. So all these 3 pieces together, I think we're going to be the ones, the veterinary epidemiology side be more forefront compared to the human epidemiologists, which are, really, doing the work in COVID, for example, but they are lacking a lot of data. They do have the expertise, but they're lacking the data. We are on the other side. we have the data, but we are lacking the expertise at this point in time. So I really look forward for more training programs, all over the planet to be able to recruit those brains to work on this topic.
I think that's a great point. We've talked about modeling for years, and it was very simple models right back then. And now, as our technology and our expertise has expanded, so have our models. And so it's exciting to think about all the pieces that we can actually start to look at and put into a model to, as you said, just give us the best ability to make the decision that maybe it's not 10 key steps for biosecurity, maybe it's 3 or 5, and that becomes more manageable for that producer. So I think that's a great outlook for the future. So as we kind of wrap up our time together, do you have any key points that you'd like our audience to take away from today's visit?
So I think I think that it's very important to have in mind that even though some people might be skeptic about estimations that transmission models provide, it is at this point in time the best close to reality that we can get. Like, we are not at the virtual reality yet to be able to actually have that different D level on the model. So, and this for the swine industry, it is a huge advantage, the data that has been collected compared to for our species, where we're just guessing a lot. We are assuming a lot of things that we don't know. With pigs, we don't have to assume so much. We have less assumptions. We can get more close to make a decision that actually realize, it's really, we don't have to test an intervention in the field. We can do that, but we can simulate that and then, let's say, run 10 different interventions and see which one seems to be better, and then select the ones that actually seems to be making a better impact, and then just focus on those. Not try to every year try a different thing and then expect, oh, I didn't find anything this time, and then, oh, I didn't find anything this time that worked. So we can do that beforehand and then say, oh, this seems to be a very promising intervention, so let's do a clinical trial on that. And that has been done now for a long time in pharma for human health, but for animal health, it's still just starting. Yes, I think one of the problems that we don't have enough trained people, to stay on that field for animal health. They all are hired by the pharma and human health because of the compensation, right? So maybe our pharma companies can increase, the fight there and provide more compensation so they can retain those folks, and in the long run they would benefit more as well. So yeah, I stop there. I think that's, I think it is, talk about this for a long time, but this think that we are going to the right direction. But the big missing piece is to have more trained brains on helping on answering all these questions that the industry have, every single day.
Perfect. Well, as you know, as we wrap up our conversations with our guest speakers, we like to ask you a few questions. So the first question I like to ask is, do you have a favorite swine resource book or website, or just a go-to piece?
Mm-hmm. So my reading, as for the past 5 years, has been, I've been reading a paper a day for the last 5 years. So I keep up that way. So every night I read a paper. It helped me a lot with new ideas and new things coming out. I try to read things on preprint before they come out of a journal. That also helped me to create new ideas. So that's my whole reading is focused on that. And what I've been actually reading lately is more on mentoring and general topics. Mentoring. There's a book called Bird by Bird that I buy and give to my students, my PhD students, which talks about story of taking piece by piece and step by step on resolving a problem and trying to be overwhelmed of things. And it's a story about someone that was struggling with big tasks. So it helps you break things. So I benefit from that book as well, because it's much easier for you to isolate problems and resolve that and then move to the next one. So that's my resources that I try to use.
Yeah, perfect. Especially when you're working with big data, right? It's piece by piece, not not the whole thing.
Yeah, need to be able to isolate things for sure.
Absolutely. Well, how about something that's maybe not related to your work? Is there a book that you would recommend to our group tonight?
So a book that I read lately, it was Why Do We Sleep? So it talks about relevance of sleeping and the physiology of sleeping. I have not realized that was so important, so I am actually reading it again and trying to apply it to my own schedule. And we tend to neglect sleep a lot, but the long term can damage our capacity of creating new things and thinking. So I think that's the book that is stuck with me right now, and I'm really think that is a good reading. You learn a lot of all your daily feelings about life. It tells you the truth that you don't want to know about. So
yeah, that sounds like a good read. I'll have to look that one up. Lastly, we like to ask our guest speaker, if you could think of somebody that you think of as successful in the industry, what's a characteristic about them that you think has helped them become successful?
I think I have two profiles that comes to mind. One is people that question a lot, especially in the industry, but also in academia, that don't accept things very easily, that they are questioning why is that, how can it be possible. I think that helps a lot, because then when you make a decision, you have not stress all the possibilities, but you have give a good thought, just agree with the herd and just go on. I think that's very important. And I see higher up people that they all have that. You can see by talking to them. And the other one is work ethic, willing to learn things. Like you can spot in the first conversation people that don't want to put the work. Those would maybe not in the short run, long run will not have a good success. And the ones that are willing to learn and willing to put the work to change their mindset and be open to new ideas, I think those tend to be very successful. It's hard to find those, so but at least when I spot one I'm trying to recruit, I make the offer right away. So those are the two profiles that to me are essential. If you don't know something, it's fine. If you're willing to learn, that topic. The other way around, that if you know things that you don't like to, to change and to be flexible, then it's a problem. So, yeah.
Very good. Very good. Well, I want to thank you for your time today, Gustavo. We greatly appreciate learning about the models that you're working on, particularly as we continue to talk about being prepared for ASF, and certainly as we continue to talk about PRRS and some of our other diseases that we continue to deal with within the United States. So again, for our audience, this is Dr. Gustavo Machado from North Carolina State University. Thank you, Gustavo.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the time.
Imagine if, with a few key concepts, you could have the potential to create a massive positive impact by bringing from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for swine producers. Join us on this small group and go to the next level of swine nutrition on this 7-week-long elite online training in applied swine nutrition and feeding by myself and my world-class invited speakers. Additionally, you enjoy an exclusive community to exchange ideas. Go now to www.eliteswinenutritionist.com.